Hey everyone, wishing you all a great Monday. The Detroit Lions just received a wave of news that could have a major impact on the team because several players who have been missing time are now getting back on the field, and some of these names could become extremely important as the season approaches. This is not about one player returning. We are talking about multiple players who could give Detroit more depth, more competition, and more options as the roster continues to take shape. The first name that immediately stands out is Juice Scruggs, and for me this is one of the biggest developments because the center position is incredibly important for this offense. McLaughlin played well while Scruggs was unavailable, but now that Scruggs is back, he has immediately returned to the first team offense. That tells us something. It tells us that, at least right now, the job appears to be his to lose. Detroit acquired Scruggs in a trade, and although he did not really establish himself with the Texans, there is clearly an opportunity for him in Detroit. Nobody is expecting him to simply become Frank Ragnow overnight, but the Lions need stability at the position, and the hope is that Scruggs can provide an upgrade over what the team had at center last season. Cade Mays is also expected to return around the middle portion of the season, but until then, Scruggs getting back into the first team offense is a development worth watching very closely, and this is where the situation becomes even more interesting, because Detroit has a schedule that creates an opportunity to build momentum early. The expectation discussed in the report is that the Lions could potentially reach the bye week with a strong record, with the Bills standing out as the particularly difficult matchup among the games mentioned. That makes having healthy players available early even more important. Another important return involves DJ Reader, although his situation comes with a little more caution because he has been dealing with another hamstring issue. When a player is dealing with a recurring hamstring problem, you obviously want to see him get healthy rather than rushing him back onto the field. But there is no question about how valuable Reader can be when he is available. The Lions need him, and seeing him working his way back is certainly encouraging. Then there is Siaki Ika, and this is a player that Dan Campbell clearly appreciates. The problem has not been a lack of confidence in what Ika can do when he is on the field. The problem has simply been his inability to stay available because one injury after another has interrupted his progress. That is why getting him back earlier than expected is such an encouraging development. For Ika, the next step is simple. Practice, get comfortable again, stay healthy, and give himself an opportunity to show what he can do. Sometimes the biggest obstacle for a young player is not talent. It is simply getting enough consecutive time on the field to develop consistency. If Ika can finally get that opportunity, the Lions could benefit significantly. The linebacker situation is also becoming fascinating. Malcolm Rodriguez is returning, but the report makes it clear that Devin White has really established himself in that area. And honestly, that is not necessarily a bad thing for Rodriguez. His role could become exactly what Detroit needs from him, a reliable rotational linebacker and special teams contributor who can step in when necessary. Rodriguez has always been an easy player for Lions fans to root for. He became a fan favorite after his Hard Knocks appearance and the way he played early in his career, but the reality is that he has not developed into a star linebacker. That does not mean he cannot have value. In fact, having a player like Rodriguez available as depth could be extremely useful, especially if he embraces a rotational role and continues to contribute on special teams. And then we get to Jimmy Rolder, and this might be one of the most interesting injury developments of all. Rolder is not practicing yet, but he is working with trainers. That is significant because the earlier expectation was that he could be out for a considerable amount of time. Now there is at least a possibility that his recovery could progress enough for him to return to practice sooner than originally expected. That does not mean we should assume he will be back immediately. It does not mean he will suddenly be ready to play at full speed, but seeing him working with the trainers gives Lions fans something positive to watch over the next couple of weeks. And there is another reason why Rolder's progress matters. According to the information discussed, Rolder had been looking better than Rodriguez before the injury. He is a little bigger and a little faster, and if he can eventually return to that level, Detroit could have a very interesting group behind Devin White. That could create a situation where White provides the experience and production the Lions need right now, while Rolder and Rodriguez develop into reliable rotational pieces. It gives Detroit flexibility, and that kind of depth can become extremely valuable over the course of a long season. Devin White himself is another story worth watching. He arrives after playing for the Raiders, where he led the team in tackles despite being part of a struggling organization. Sometimes a change of environment can make a huge difference for a veteran player. White now has an opportunity to come into Detroit, contribute for a team with different expectations, and potentially give the Lions exactly the kind of energy and production they were hoping to get from him. But the biggest surprise may have nothing to do with a veteran. Dan Campbell had some very positive things to say after reviewing the film about rookie cornerback Keith Abney, and that is important because the cornerback position has been a frustrating area for Detroit. Finding reliable players at corner is difficult, whether through the draft or free agency, so when a 5th round pick starts showing signs that he might be able to contribute, Lions fans have every reason to pay attention. Abney was selected in the 5th round, and there was already a feeling that he could have been taken earlier. Now, Campbell's comments after watching the film only add to the excitement. The message coming from Campbell was that Abney looks comfortable, physical, and capable of handling the moment. He does not appear overwhelmed by the situation, and that is exactly what you want to see from a young cornerback. Of course, this is still just the preseason. One game does not turn a 5th round pick into a proven NFL starter, but this is precisely the stage where young players can start changing the conversation around themselves. Abney has already given the coaching staff something positive to evaluate, and now the next opportunity is coming at home. That means there is a lot to watch. There are returning players trying to get healthy. There are young players trying to establish themselves. There are veterans trying to prove they belong in important roles. And there are players like Abney who can potentially turn a late round draft selection into a very valuable piece of the roster. Even Jake Bates managed to make his presence felt in an unusual way. He hit a 41-yard field goal and then followed it with a 52-yarder, making both kicks look extremely comfortable. But he also made a touchdown-saving tackle on a kickoff return, which is the kind of thing that immediately gets attention during a preseason game. Of course, nobody wants their kicker making tackles if they can avoid it. The ideal situation is for Bates to kick the ball, let the coverage unit handle the return, and get himself safely to the sideline. There is absolutely no reason to risk an unnecessary injury during the preseason. But the fact remains that Bates showed up in more than one way, and his kicking performance was certainly something positive to take away. There were also encouraging signs involving young defensive players such as Hassanane and Gil Howard. Campbell described Howard as the type of young player who can be told something once and immediately understand it. That matters because the Lions are looking to see whether these young defensive linemen can handle the less glamorous responsibilities of playing in the NFL. At Texas Tech, Howard was part of an environment where the games could turn into high-scoring shootouts. In Detroit, the question is different. Can he handle the dirty work? Can he absorb double teams? Can he do the things that do not necessarily appear in the box score but allow everyone around him to make plays? The early signs suggest that he can, and that may be one of the most important themes coming out of all of this. Detroit is not simply getting injured players back. The Lions are also learning more about the young players who could become important parts of the roster. The preseason is still the preseason, and nobody should turn one performance into a guarantee about what will happen during the regular season. But when you combine the return of important players with positive evaluations of young talent, suddenly there is a lot more to be excited about. Juice Scruggs is back with the first-team offense. DJ Reader is working his way back. Siaki Ika is returning earlier than expected. Malcolm Rodriguez is back in the picture. Jimmy Rolder is working with trainers. Keith Abney is earning praise from Dan Campbell. Jake Bates is showing he can make long kicks. And young defensive players are giving the coaching staff reasons to keep watching them closely. For a Lions team trying to build momentum early, having these players available and competing could make a significant difference. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these returning players or young players are you most excited to watch, and which one do you believe could have the biggest impact on the Detroit Lions this season? And that question becomes even more interesting when you look at what these developments could mean for the Lions as the preseason continues. The biggest thing Detroit has right now is competition. Players are coming back, young players are getting opportunities, and the coaching staff is getting more information before the regular season arrives. Juice Scruggs is a perfect example. His return is not simply about having another offensive lineman available. He immediately went back to the first-team offense at center, which shows how seriously Detroit is evaluating him for that position. The Lions need to find the right right answer at center, and every practice rep matters. Scruggs now has an opportunity to build chemistry with the rest of the offensive line and prove that he can handle the responsibility. At the same time, the team cannot afford to ignore the importance of keeping these players healthy. DJ Reader's hamstring situation is exactly the type of thing the Lions have to manage carefully. Getting a player back is great, but getting him back too quickly and risking another setback would accomplish nothing. The goal is to have these players ready when the games actually count. That same patience applies to Jimmy Rolder. The fact that he is working with trainers and moving well is encouraging, but he still has to complete the recovery process. What matters is that there is now something positive to watch. A player who was initially expected to miss significant time is at least back on the field doing work, and the next couple of weeks could tell us much more about his chances of returning to practice. If Rolder does make it back, the linebacker room becomes even more interesting. Devin White has already given the Lions a veteran presence, while Malcolm Rodriguez provides experience and special teams value. Rolder could potentially add another dimension because of his size and speed. That is exactly the kind of depth a team wants. You do not need every linebacker to be a superstar. You need players who understand their assignments, know their roles, and can step onto the field without the defense falling apart. And then there is Keith Abney. This is probably one of the names Lions fans should keep circling as the preseason moves forward. Cornerback is one of those positions where a young player can completely change the conversation with a few strong performances. Abney is already receiving positive feedback from Dan Campbell after the coaching staff had an opportunity to study his film. The important part is not simply that Campbell liked what he saw, it is what he liked. Abney looked comfortable, he looked physical, he looked like the moment was not too big for him. For a 5th round pick,